Ed Norwood. Wow. What a great conversation with Ed. Absolutely amazing story. Generational trauma. What do you know about it? You know, the trauma that your parents had, how it affects you. So at 8 years old, Ed Norwood, his mother, his cousins were all involved in the Jonestown Tragedy Massacre. I don't know how many of you remember that. It was 45 years ago. This terrorist took people to Guyana, and we were told it was almost 1,000 people, the largest day of American tragedy since most people dead, I believe, since 9/11. We were told it was all suicide, but Ed straightens that out, and there was needles and needle holes in people's shoulder and arrow shots and gunshots, and but the trauma at 8 years old, knowing that his cousins were there and he wasn't, and his family was there, and how that took hold in the rest of his life. He wrote a book, Be a Giant Killer. You know, those giants that are in your life, slay them and take them down. When generational trauma affects you that way, and what's your story? It's just a wonderful, wonderful conversation with Ed about that, about overcoming shame and fear and surviving, and thriving post trauma. His mission is to transform a generation scarred by shame and fear into powerful giant killers. Help them overcome bad family history. Great conversation with Ed Norwood. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic. I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Very, very excited to talk to you, Ed Norwood. Thank you so much for your time today. Why is life in the black box?
Well, it's interesting. I was in a therapy session some years ago, and my therapist was sharing with me that our hearts are like black boxes. And if you remember the black box, or you recall hearing about it, it's this little indestructible piece of metal that's under a pilot seat, and it records everything. It remembers the good. Welcome to XYZ Airlines. We'll have a great flight for 6 hours. Put your feet up, enjoy the flight. And it remembers the bad. Mayday, Mayday, fire in the cockpit, prepare for crash landing. And if this plane plunges into the ocean and there's mass casualties and breaks up apart upon impact, the government will send divers past the debris, past the wreckage, past the casualties, to find this little black box, because it has the capability to experience catastrophic failure or disaster and still remember. And that's us. That's our heart. Our heart. We remember every celebration, every betrayal, every success, every wound, every hurt. We can experience events in our life that are devastating and still remember them. And I've learned this, Joey, the heart has no time.
Hmm.
Trauma can't tell time.
Hmm.
That's why a 5-year-old, a 50-year-old man can throw a 5-year-old tantrum,
Hmm.
or a 40-year-old woman who was abused when she was young still has trusting issues, because our heart needs to be rewired over the course of time.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very interesting lesson. And
Mhm.
Ed, we have to start with your story because you're a giant killer, right? And that's what your book is: be a giant killer. But you've carried something. So at 8 years old, you were involved in the involved. You were witness of the Jonestown tragedy. 27 of your relatives
Yeah,
were there. Your mother
yeah,
was part of it. Well, she wasn't part of it, but she was put a hit on. But it's
yeah,
it's where kind of your trauma started, and to carry all that. Please tell me a little bit about that. 8 years old.
yeah. Jonestown was it was the largest loss of civilian life on a single day before 9/11. It was a black day in human history. Over 900 people were murdered by Jim Jones after Congressman Leo Ryan was assassinated. And it's interesting, because I've done a lot of interviews. This was the 45th anniversary recently of the
Wow.
Jonestown tragedy. And one of the things I wanted the book to do was dispel the myth of it being mass suicide. You'll find, I believe, in page 206 of my book, I write a bit about the autopsy report that came out of Jonestown, where the autopsy, or the pathologist that was there, Dr. Leslie Mutu, he was in Jonestown within hours after the massacre. And he refused the assistance of U.S. pathologists and accompanied the teams that counted the dead, examined the bodies, and worked to identify the deceased. And while the American press screamed about the Kool-Aid suicide, this is an excerpt from In the Black Hole of Guyana by John Judge, Dr. Mutu was reaching a much different opinion. He found fresh needle marks at the back of the left shoulder blades of 80 to 90% of the victims. Others had been shot or strangled. And I have an interesting picture from the Freedom of Information Act request, where you can see a crossbow arrow in the pillar where Jones gathered everyone after he had assassinated Leo Ryan. And they found crossbow arrows in the backs of people who tried to run. And so it's a quite interesting take, because Don't Drink the Kool-Aid is the front page story, but the backstory is the giant of fear that caused hundreds to almost 1,000 people, families after families, children after mothers, to go into Jonestown. And those children, about a third of the victims, were children. I had 7 cousins who were kidnapped into Jonestown. My uncle came home, house was ransacked, wife was gone, kids were gone. He never saw them again. My mom began to have prophetic dreams that Jones was going to kill our family in the jungle, so she hid me, and that her obedience to that dream saved my life.
Incredible, Ed. So Jim Jones, a terrorist, let's just call him what he is,
Yeah,
practicing as a preacher, took a bunch of people to Guyana, and what we were told when I was a kid is that
true.
everybody drank this poison
Yeah,
Kool-Aid and committed
yeah,
mass suicide. That's the
yeah.
story we were told as Americans.
Yes,
Not the
yes,
case at all.
yes. And it's crazy because just think for a moment. They're in the pavilion, and Jones comes and he says, "Hey, the congressman has been killed, not on an airplane, not by accident, but I've sent killers, and we've killed the congressman, and the government will now come into this pavilion and take your children. And just for a moment, think about that. Some of them in their minds had to have thought, because Ryan arrived on the 17th. And, before that, there were reports that Jones had a concentration camp held there. They were eating rice and beans or rice and water. And all of a sudden, when Ryan gets there, the day before, they have fried chicken, they have mashed potatoes, they have corn. He puts on a great big show. People, the reports that came out of Jonestown, Joey, people were terrified to even approach Leo Ryan to say, hey, can you take me with you? I don't want to be here. The next day, the next morning, it's a rainy morning. Slowly but surely, people start passing notes to Ryan's team. I want to leave. Why not the night before when everything looked beautiful? They were terrified they would make it through the night without being killed in their sleep. So they start passing notes. People start leaving. There were about 25 defectors that went on the tarp. And the moment the other 900 hear, we've killed them, or we've killed 6 of them, the others have gotten away. Can you imagine what people were thinking? Man, Congressman Ryan was our only hope. How are we going to survive the night knowing that he just killed a congressman? What value, what worth do we have seeing he just assassinated a member of the U.S. Congress? And so it's a troubling story because, he was people often, my uncle was angry for years
Of course.
that his 7 kids were taken by this so-called church. But Jim Jones, Joey, did not belong to the church. The People's Temple was a cult, and Jones was a socialist and communist. So we tell people, don't confuse with what happened in Jonestown with the Church of Jesus Christ. The Apostle John once wrote something powerful in 1 John 2:19. He said, they went out from us, but they really did not belong to us. For if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. But their going out showed that none of them belonged to us at all. And 45 years later, over 900 senseless deaths later, it teaches us that we should not ignore data and red flags in relationships. We should never ignore or marginalize bad family history or decisions. And that's really why I wrote the book.
So, Ed, at 8 years old, you get this news that this tragedy, this terrorist action has happened, and what are your reactions? What's the next step for you? What happens then?
Remember, I was in the temple. My
Yes.
mom, my mom traveled as an evangelist, so 7 of my closest cousins are gone,
All right.
and it was tough for me. I remember waking up around 8, at 8 years old, and coming in the living room and just feeling and sensing something was wrong. And I guess by that time they were scrolling the names up on the screen of the people who had died, like a Star Wars movie. And I remember that as if it were yesterday, watching those names come up and identifying my cousins who were killed in the tragedy. It was quite difficult for me. When I went into the temple, there was community, there was life. It seemed like people were making a difference. I don't know if you realize this, but Jim Jones had presidents and mayors in his pulpit.
Hmm.
He was a housing commissioner in several cities. He held protests to fight for racial equality. And it seemed like it was a great place, but there were some red flags that I realized years later that I didn't see at 8 years old or 6 to 7 years old when I was there.
So you're carrying the weight of this trauma, Ed. I mean, into your 8 years old, you're in 4th grade and you have to carry on, you have to carry your life on. What is it? Um, are you ostracized? Do the friends, do they talk about it? I mean, talk to me about that process.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because, I kept my, for years, to be honest with you, I didn't share. I mean, I spoke in memorial services
Mhm.
every year, but I didn't share my story with in my business circles of influence. And a lot of it was out of fear
Mm,
and out of shame
mm,
of how they died, what they believed. And so it kind of changed me. And I remember one of the reasons why I wrote Be a Giant Killer was I recall going to a men's conference. And in the men's conference, they were asking us a few things. Number one, they encouraged us to write our life story and share it with our wives from the very beginning to where we were right now. And I was terrified to do that because I've experienced trauma in my life as a child growing up. And one of the things they shared was out of Genesis 2, when it says that when Adam and Eve were both naked, they felt no shame.
mm.
Why? Because shame hides. When Adam and Eve failed, they begin to create fig leaves and cover themselves up. And in life, oftentimes we have created things to cover up the shame,
Hmm.
the mistakes, the hurts, and we try to build a business over the trauma or the pain, or we try to work out that trauma in a gym, and we hide. We hide from, we mask ourselves and we hide from our spouses and our children. We hide from God. And I believe that people relive the stories that we don't tell, or the hurts that we don't heal, or the history that we won't rewrite. And so when I went to this men's conference, that really impacted me to write my life story. The second part was they said, I want you to write down, hey, 10 things that you wish you would have heard in your life that you've never
Mm,
heard.
mm,
And man, I began to write them down. And as I'm writing them, I don't know if you can see this, as I'm writing them, 10 of the 10 of the things that I'm writing down, they are from my father. Now, my
mm.
father was never in my life, Joey, at all whatsoever. The only story I remember was him coming to pick me up and saying he's going to take me to buy a coat. I was really excited. They had bomber jackets back then. You might remember that. Other people won't. At the fur around the hood. And he picks me up. He takes me to the liquor store down the corner, down the street, and he buys me a Coke. I thought he said coat, but he meant Coca-Cola.
Uh,
And that's the only memory I have of him. And so in this self-discovery, man, I've learned that
mm,
we need to understand our family history. We need to ask questions. And in this session I'm in, I'm writing these things down, and they're all about my father who was never in my life.
hmm,
I'm writing things down such as, hey, son, that was a great game today. How was school? Hey, you're going to be okay. You matter. I love you. Who do you like at school?
hmm.
What do you want to study in college? And and so it forced me to really begin to not only write my life story, but begin to ask hard questions to people like my father, and to ask him things like, I asked my mom at one point, Mom, why didn't you and Dad work out? And she tells me a story. I would dress you up. and you'd sit there waiting for him in your jacket. And when he wouldn't show up, you would burst into tears uncontrollably.
Mm.
And we would try to take your jacket off, and you'd be screaming to keep your jacket on, waiting for him to show up. And I'm a 48-year-old man, Joey, listening to this, and I start crying uncontrollably.
Mm.
It's as if I had buried those memories on the inside. And I begin to realize that we subconsciously carry the things that we bury in life. And we have such a responsibility to the next generation to make sure we excavate some of those things, the things that
Mm.
we're carrying from childhood into our adulthood that's affecting our relationships today. Because if my father's inactions can affect me, I thought to myself, how much more can my actions
Mm.
affect my children?
You talk about shame,
Mm.
and help me understand why you felt shame at 8 years old after all this tragedy happened.
I think the shame came in the years past.
I see.
At 8, it was just the trauma of,
Mm.
man, they're gone.
Mm.
I was there. That could have been me. I saw the toys, I saw the food, man, but I saw the red flags as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
I saw how when kids were misbehaving, he would create a boxing ring
Yeah.
and have an older kid pound that kid into unconsciousness. I saw that. Experts say that 80 to 90% of how we observe things occurs by the age of 5 or 6.
Mm.
And so, since 5 or 6, Joey, you and I have been watching
Mm.
and observing and watching and observing how people love, how people forgive, how people handle and respond to conflict, how we respond to people, places, and things. And so, I think over the course of the years, then the shame came because as children, man, we're kind of carefree, right? We imagine things. We have an immense imagination to hear and tell stories, bedtime stories, make believe stories. In fact, if we would exaggerate those stories, I had the old school grandma that would say, "Boy, stop telling what stories."
Stories, yeah.
And as children, there's no limit to what and where we could be. We play house, we play cowboys and commanders. You'll catch that in a minute. We play ballerina, we play superstar, supermodel, superhero, NASCAR. But then we become adults and we live the disappointment, we live the shame, we live the hurt, we live the stories, and we bury them. We hide the stories that have stained, shaped, and maimed us. But I believe buried stories are buried treasure. And whether books, whether podcasts, whether songs or films or journals, I believe a story lives in us if we're courageous enough to tell it.
Mm. Many soldiers, when they come back from war, they have a kind of survivor's guilt. My best buddy died, but I didn't. Was there any of that as well with you? How your cousins got, and you were still alive? Was there any of that?
Yeah, I felt I felt that.
Mm.
That was one of the reasons why I wrote this book was to really honor not just my cousins, but man, a third of these victims were children.
Yeah.
What could they have been in the past 45 years? In that jungle 45 years ago, we found And we understand that there were future presidents and
Mm,
lawyers
mm.
and doctors and chemists and authors and
Fathers, mothers.
superstars
Yes,
who
yes.
died there.
Yeah.
And so much of my life was trying to
Mm,
live as much as I could for them because their lives were cut short. But shame is always a dream killer, right?
mm, mm, mm.
Shame attacks our being and our worth. It will keep you from pursuing your calling and create this relentless performance cycle that says you can never rest. It convinces you to constantly try to prove yourself to people because of your past or because of your history or something that took place. And the message of shame that I've learned over the course of years is you'll never be worth anything. People won't listen to you, and you don't deserve true love or forgiveness. And over the course of the years, I've tried to make sure I show people how to overcome the giant of shame by using their voice to tell their story. Let me just share this. Sometimes telling your story can be scary.
Yeah.
What if people won't receive me? What if they will judge me? What if they will see me differently? It can be a scary thing to share your story. But I believe that in sharing our story, we get to allow our voice to be heard. And you may not change people when you allow your voice to be heard. Because a part of the book is talking about asking hard questions, asking what your family history is. Dad, why didn't you and mom not work out? Not ignoring the things that hang from our family tree as harmless, but identifying some of those things and talking about the things that have hurt you, that have wounded you. And often when you're doing that, you're talking to the same people who perhaps through their silence didn't comfort you. So can you change them by doing that? Not necessarily.
Mm,
But I believe that when you talk to people that you love, or you begin to share your story or your hurts or the things that affected you, I believe that the little boy and girl in us matures faster.
mm.
No more tantrums, no more silence, no more violence. And so, if the most important thing is that your voice was heard, we just encourage people, tell your story.
Mm, mm. Let yourself be heard. Be vulnerable.
Because when we're vulnerable, we can't be ugly.
You certainly can't. Ed, your faith, your spirituality is a very big part of your life. As a child, did this incident put it in another direction? Did it put it in another light? Did you question it? Did it increase it? What happened?
Yeah, people ask me this question quite a bit. How did you continue to just hold your faith together
Mm,
after experiencing the loss of so many people? What made you still believe in God? What made you, what held your faith together?
mm,
And really, for me, it was my faith that carried me in
mm.
a very difficult season. Because we have a tendency to just carry some things, right? And say things like, well, if it didn't kill me, it made me stronger.
Mm,
Well, it is what it is. But my faith has taught me over the course of the years the importance of being able to approach God and approach people from a different perspective. And so now, I think at one point I wrote in the book that, what happened in Jonestown happens every single day. We stay in abusive relationships to our
Mm.
detriment. We die prematurely. We believe the wrong leader and allow them to affect the narrative in our life. We cower in shame. We run from fear or from dysfunctional relationships. I mean, that's what happened in Jonestown. The people of Jonestown were running. And it's interesting, from Jonestown, there were stories of survivors who were saying when they made it out, they hid in the jungle, that people were screaming the name of Jesus as they were running, trying to asking for help because they did not want to die
Mm.
over 45 years ago. And so we share with people the importance of understanding that no matter how far you run from him, that the darkest alley and the strongest drug or addiction can't hide you from the presence of God. And that's a big part of our book, showing people how to recover from things that have happened in their story.
Your spirituality, your faith is very strong. I watched a great video of you speaking, preaching, where we all need to put it in the trust, and
Yeah.
it was very moving. It was very moving, Ed, and it was wonderful. On your Instagram, you've got great social media. You've got great videos of yourself. You've got these great quotes that just made me sit back and think. It ran in my family until it ran into me.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we have a great opportunity to ensure that we don't transmit the traumas, the fears that we have lived with to the next generation. I'm in healthcare as well as an advocate. And as a healthcare advocate, I have learned that our physician members value family history immensely.
Mm.
And so much they'll have you write those questionnaires down. Who in your family had high blood pressure? Who had heart disease? I'm writing this thing, Joey, a couple of years ago.
Mm.
I don't know what to put down. And I've learned that they identify those things because through our genetic makeup, we can pass the natural beauty of our looks, of our
Mm.
hair color and type, our unique facial features, our eyelashes. I used to hate my eyelashes as a young person, and when I got older, I loved my eyelashes. We can transfer even metabolism or athletic prowess to our children. But our kids inherit more than just diseases and physical characteristics. My kids inherit every residue of me,
Mm.
every giant, every habit I've not dealt with, they have access to. In fact, one of the individuals in the seminar, the men's seminar I shared with you from New Life Ministries,
Mm.
said, I want you to tell your story to your wife because your story is her story. She's living your story every single day.
Mm.
And every giant I don't confront and defeat, the chaos, gossip that's running my family, anger, trauma, addiction, lust, manipulation, multiple divorces, bad credit, fiscal irresponsibility, every giant I don't confront or defeat grows into the next generation. And the things left unresolved from Our history, if we don't confront it, can stain our legacy.
So, Ed, you learn these things. You're doing seminars. You're doing all the internal work. You do also talk about how your marriage hit a rough spot. I think you said about year 10, and you worked it out. And you sought counseling. You sought help. Why write the book? Why try to not only keep it to yourself but help others?
I think it was important for me that I recognized that if I was carrying things from my childhood
Mm,
into my adulthood, so are my kids.
mm,
I um, I was a great encourager when my kids were growing up, Joey, but I wasn't a great comforter at all whatsoever.
mm,
I was the kind of person where if they had a game coming up that next day and they couldn't make it, I could tell them, "Hey, you're going to be fine. You're going to get through it. You're awesome. Hey, you'll get them next time. Next man up mentality, next game up mentality." But rarely did I sit on the edge of their bed and say to them, "Hey, I know you really prepared hard for that game or that test today, and it must be so hard that you are not able to go. How are you doing with that?" Rarely did I have those kind of conversations with them. And so I'm learning the importance of being a greater comforter.
mm,
I was reading this recently, and it says in the book of Isaiah 40, your God says to you, comfort my people with gentle, compassionate words. Speak tenderly from the heart to revive those
mm.
in Jerusalem and proclaim that their warfare is over. And I began to just read as I was reading that, think to myself that comfort ends the wars that are in our lives.
Mm.
Even if I'm fighting with my wife and we're having a silent war and we're not speaking to each other, or if she's sharing with me something that is on her heart and she's crying in tears for years, and I'm still working through this, Joey, I would watch her and I wouldn't comfort her per se. Because sometimes it's difficult to give people what you never received.
Hmm.
My mom traveled for ministry. So through my high school, 14 to 18, I raised myself. If I had a bad day, I had to comfort myself, tell myself,
Mm.
get up, you gotta make it happen tomorrow. If I had a disappointment, I had to try to comfort myself and tell myself, all right, you're fine. You're the man of the house now. You got to move forward.
Uh,
And so I never experienced comfort to give it to anyone. And I believe that over the course of time, the lack of comfort that I've given to those close to me has affected relationships so much so that I now have to go backwards.
mm.
Sometimes we have to go back to move forward. Um, um, I've had to go back and excavate things that happened in my kid's life to say things like, hey, son, when you were 14 and this happened and you were embarrassed and I made you go to your coach in front of your players, your teammates and say this, I realized that I embarrassed you.
Mm.
And dad was angry and prideful. Can you ever forgive me for doing just that? Because I believe that before God ever revives or restores something, a relationship, a friendship through us, a marriage or a bond, we have to speak tenderly to it.
Mm.
We have to have the ability to empathize and to use our words to heal and to not hurt. And so, really, me writing the book was about me trying to keep myself accountable to my
Mm,
own family, to
mm.
my wife, to my children, to constantly work on myself so that every 6 months or so, every 3 months, every year, my parenting and my marriage or me being a husband to my wife, I look unrecognizable to them because I'm constantly working things out from my past that have found itself into my present.
You needed to write this book, Ed. You didn't have to, you needed to.
Yeah, yeah, it was healing for me. It was truly healing for me, Joey. Absolutely.
You state one of your missions is your desire to transform a generation scarred by shame and fear into powerful giant killers to help them overcome bad family history.
Mm, mm. To help giant killers and the little boy and little girl in giant killers
Mm.
gain an audience, even if no one is listening, to make sure they are speaking. And I believe that God allows us to give the unresolved pain and the resentment and the dysfunction a voice, no matter how many times people try to silence it. And so it's just massive for me to make sure that we raise giant killers. How do we do it? We need to repent of our family history. Sorry, back up. We need to know what our family history is. We need
Mm.
to ask the hard questions that we've been afraid to ask for years and decades. Because that's why our children are called descendants, right? Something is constantly descending from us, from
Mm.
you and I to them. And we've just been a habit of passing down what's been passed down to us. But we need to first identify those things, know our family history, and then ask the hard questions, not to rebuke or to embarrass or shame people, but to just ask the questions that have shamed us, that are difficult for people to talk about, because we really can't know where we're going without understanding our history. And then we need to repent for our family history. That means being able to repent for the things that maybe came into your life that had nothing to do with you. You were simply a victim of it.
Mm.
God, I repent of a father who was absent in my life. I repent of a family history where I had a father who didn't care for me, who wasn't a provisionary and father with great protection. I repent of a father that did not comfort me. And now I've transmitted that lack of comfort to my children.
Mm.
But being able to go back and deal with some of those things is massive, because otherwise, the residue of what created us, those love styles, man, they breathe through us. They make it through to us through our words and through our actions to people. And so I believe we have a profound responsibility to create giant killers. And that just means looking back to move forward.
And I remember reading about, generational trauma where they did science experiments on mice where they would, have them touch something and it burn them, and then have offspring from those mice, and they would be shy when it came to that one area that their parents got
Wow.
burned from.
Wow. I didn't know that. Who did that study? That's powerful.
It is, and I may not have it 100% right, but I remember I talked to somebody else about generational trauma, and they brought that study up. I could certainly we need to fact find on that, but I remember them doing experiments specifically about this on mice, and it's a scientific proved, you know, not a theory, but a fact at this point. So we didn't ask for it. It's
Yeah,
there. We don't realize we act the way we do. I mean, our parents, had different issues.
yeah,
My parents are from Europe, and my great grandparents were part of the Depression. I mean, they
yeah,
barely had they had a potato that they would. My father got his first pair of shoes when he was 12. So
sure,
poor immigrants. So they just had different things. They didn't have, and their excuse, well, we didn't have time to love. We were just trying to survive. And,
sure,
this is just the way that, I'm not blaming anything, by the way. It's just the way they lived. And we're a
sure.
little bit different now. And we hope that we could do better for our children.
There was a website called SciComm, and they said that it's PSYCOM, and they said that trauma can leave a chemical mark on a person's genes, which can then be passed down to future generations. And the mark is not a mutation, but an alteration of how that gene is expressed.
Mm,
And they said it's not genetics, but something called um, epi- epigenetics, if I'm
mm,
pronouncing that correctly. And they simply said that is the study of the biological control mechanisms of DNA, the light switches that turn genes on or off.
wow.
And then I start looking into that just a bit. Well, what's a gene? A gene represents our inheritance, what is passed from parents to offspring to specify physical and biological traits. And through epigenetics or experiences, we can determine how what we inherit is expressed in the next generation.
Hmm,
So then, watch this, our experiences, our hurts, and our fears can alter our biology and
wow.
behavior of our children and grandchildren. And as I was looking at that, I thought to myself, man, our kids can fall heir to a 25 or 50-year-old marriage, and they could fall heir to a 25 or 50-year-old dysfunctional family.
Mm,
They can fall heir to parents that communicate their heart or comfort their heart, or they can fall heir to a parent that is critical. We dictate the inheritance left, not the one that's received, not the one that we gain. We dictate the inheritance that we leave. And so I think it's so profound and so powerful for us to understand that whatever we receive often is whatever we give.
mm.
And if we've received from previous generations dysfunction and a critical mindset and hurt, or watch this. I was talking to someone who was estranged from their children, and they came and shared with me, the young lady, my husband was raised with a British background, and he never heard his father ever say, I love you or I'm sorry.
Mm.
And I looked back at her with clear and transparent eyes and said, isn't it exciting that you and I get to change that in
Mm.
our generation? And that's what being a giant killer is,
Hmm.
repaying hurt with healing, refusing to stay where our predecessors, our previous generations left us.
That's wonderfully profound, Ed. Ed Norwood, what motivates you?
Hmm. Leaving legacy,
Hmm.
being able to work on myself because I'm a work in progress. I'm flawed. I make mistakes. I'm not the perfect husband. I'm not the perfect father. But being able to constantly be challenged with the profound responsibility to be different today than I was yesterday
Hmm.
motivates me. And sometimes, my wife would tell you she wishes I was motivated more often. But I really mean that. I exist to make sure that I don't allow my history to repeat itself. Over the pavilion where the victims of Jonestown died, there was a quote that Jones had up that said, "Those that do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And I exist to make sure that history, a history of being indifferent, a history of not listening and not being empathetic, a history of reacting and not responding, a history of hurts. I exist to make sure that my history of trauma doesn't repeat itself in my generation. Because regardless of history, our present decisions can change our legacy. My first credit card, Joey, I got was 19. I was excited about it. I told my coworkers at work, I'm going to take you out to lunch. There was a lady that had some common sense. Her name was Paula Strode that pulled me to the side and said, "Don't you do that." I said, "You're crazy. I'm going to take them out. We're going to enjoy ourselves." She said, "Don't you do that." And little did I know that that decision to take them out and max my card out would create a trajectory of
Mm.
bad decisions in my life, to the point that at one point my credit score was 500. And I've learned over the course of time, Joey, that you can't pray a bad credit score up.
Mm. You cannot.
You have to change some patterns of how you pay things back. You have to be accountable. You have to change your payment history. You have to dispute some things. And I've learned over the course of time that as I work on those things, I can look different. My credit score is now in the 770s. Joey, people can't even see, unless they're looking at your podcast, that I had a 500 credit score.
Right.
Man, I want my life to look like that.
Mm.
That because of the decisions that I make and the changes that I make in my life and the alterations I engage in, that people can't even see that I used to be that angry and that prideful and that messed up. I want them to see something different because I've changed some patterns in my life. I've become accountable and responsible to ensure I pay back people what I owe them.
How do you measure success, Ed?
It's a great question. I heard a one of our grandfathers in the faith came to our church and he preached this one time. He said, "You can't be a success without a successor."
Mm.
And so in scripture, it says in one of the Proverbs that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children.
Mm.
And God has set it up so that you can't even determine the type of man that I am. I heard T.D. Jakes say this one time, until you see my children's children, how my influence affected how they raised their children
Mm.
and loved their children and forgave their children.
Mm.
So for me, seeing success is being able to create people that can succeed you, that can be greater husbands and greater fathers and greater wives and moms than we could ever be, because we were transparent, we were naked and vulnerable, and we allowed them, we opened up the book covers of our life to let them see our story that transformed theirs.
It's fascinating to me, Ed, how you wrote a book and it's your mission to, you know, quell this generational trauma. And when I ask you about your motivation and your success, they both deal with legacy. It all
Mhm.
ties in together.
Yes, yes. And I think for me, it's those things because I can't control what happened to me at 8,
Right.
right? I was 8 years old and I saw a lot of traumatic things. I really can't control any of that, but I can control what happens to me at 50, 53.
Mm.
I can control what happens now.
Hmm.
Some of the people that hurt, that abuse me and so forth, I can't control what they should have done in their life, but I can control getting some work now. I had this conversation with my dad. Dad, why weren't you in my life? I could have used a father when I was growing up. It's really hard not having someone during this season. And I remember talking to him and hearing him say to me, son, I'm not even sure if I'm your father.
Mm.
And it was difficult for me. I was angry at some point when I heard him say that. And over the course of the years, I began to realize that he's never told me happy birthday before.
Mm.
And one year I questioned him and I asked him, hey, Dad, I think I came in actually, and he called me. He didn't even know it was my birthday. And he said, hey, what are you doing today? I said, oh, it was my birthday. My family took me out. Silence. He doesn't say anything. And over the course of years, it started bothering me. It really got under my skin. And so I started asking him a question. I sent him a text message one time. Hey, Dad, can you tell me why you've never said happy birthday to me? Silence.
Mm.
Another birthday passes. People are writing happy birthday on Facebook. I know he sees it. I ask him again, hey, Dad, can you tell me why you've never said happy birthday to me? He's quiet. So I went to my therapist because sometimes um, I'm a big proponent, number one, of therapy. It saved my marriage. It
Mm.
saved my life.
Mm.
And sometimes you're in therapy for people that won't go to therapy.
Mm.
So I remember going to my therapist, telling them what's happening with my dad, and he gives me a few words. And so I go back to my dad and say, Dad, can you help me understand why you have a problem celebrating the day I was born? And it finally opened him up to have a conversation, and that's another story. But sometimes just by asking the right question
Mm.
resolves a question in your mind
Mm.
or something in your heart that you've been carrying for years. And so I think legacy is really, really important. I think it's important how our kids see us. And we can no longer have the mindset that says, well, I did the best that I could.
Mm.
Well, that's how I was raised. You can now raise your kids differently if you want to. No, people say it is what it is. No, it is what people have made it.
Mm. It's a cop out.
We can change that.
Yeah.
We can we can become we can earn things when we as men. I heard someone say this recently. As men, we know how to earn a position on a team. We know how to earn a job. We know how
Mm.
to earn the heart of someone that we're pursuing or recording, our wife, the person that we've married. We know how to earn things in relationships, and it's no different. It's no different now than it was then.
Mm. So Ed, I started my business in the 90s. I was working way too hard. I know you have your own business as well. I was working long days and I was not paying attention to my health. And I was new in my marriage and I found myself at 340 pounds, right? I was just eating pizza and burgers and soda and not exercising. And the doctor said to me, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. My oldest was
Wow.
just born.
Wow.
So I took the next 6 or 7 months. I lost 130 pounds, and
Wow.
I kept it off. Right. So
That's outstanding.
once the thought of now I brought this person in the world. It's much more than me. It's them as well. And so when people ask me how, losing weight is some of the most difficult things you could do in life. How would your
Yeah.
secret? What'd you do? What'd you do? It's a one word answer, Ed, and it's discipline.
Yeah.
That's how I lost the
I
weight.
love that. I love
That's how
that.
I lost it. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know.
Sure.
Discipline, and you don't treat it like a finish line because 90% of the people gain the weight back, right? And you've got to
Sure.
continue with it. It's a life change. I
Sure.
wonder how discipline plays a role in your life, Ed Norwood.
Yeah. Number one, that's outstanding that you lost 100 pounds, and what a story.
Mm.
What an inspiration you've been able to just extend to. Is it your daughter? Is that what you said?
Yes. Yeah.
To your daughter, for her to see that no matter what decisions that we've made as men before that were ill disciplined, that we can become disciplined and change that.
Mm.
We can change how our habits are, how we exercise, and how we take advantage of things. In fact, I was diagnosed about a year ago that I had high blood pressure that affected my kidneys, and I had to do something very, very similar. I had to lose some pounds. I didn't lose as much as you, but it still felt like it was so hard
Mm.
to do. I
Mm.
had to change my diet. It wasn't just exercise. My diet had to change. What I consumed had to change. And I remember just walking, changing the food intake that I actually ate. And my wife and I started cooking and doing different things,
Mm.
and cooking at home more instead of eating out.
Mm.
And I was able to bring my weight down from 204 to 178 or something like that.
Great.
And it started reversing some of what was happening with my blood
Mm.
pressure just
Mm.
by making those decisions. I tell a story, Joey, of my wife. I'm helping her in the kitchen cook because, you know, I don't cook as well as she does at all whatsoever. And she'll give me a reminder of that from time to time.
Mm.
And I'm in the kitchen with her. And while I'm in the kitchen with her, she tells me, wait, no, 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 let me cut that up. Let me cut those onions up.
Mm.
You're not doing it with love. You're just trying to get over. You're just trying to get it done with. You're trying to get it over with right now.
Mm.
You're
Mm.
just trying to
Mm.
get through it. And the onions are big, and the jalapenos are big. No, you've got to dice them. You've got to love what you're doing.
Mm. Mm.
And I start thinking to myself, she said this to me at different times in my life. If I'm
Mm.
putting on, if she's teaching me a regimen for my skin, I'm putting on moisturize. She'll tell me, stop that. You're just trying to get through it. You aren't putting the lotion on with love. You've got to put it on your fingertips and massage your skin.
Mm. Mm.
You can't just slap it all over your body. You'll create
Mm.
wrinkles. You got
Mm.
to change that. And over the course of time, I realized that the love that she's speaking about has become a discipline for her.
Mm.
And that discipline is so profound and so powerful because discipline never. I was talking to her recently because she's taught me how to do certain things in the kitchen, and she's changed it on me. I said, "You didn't teach me how to do that before." She
Mm.
says, "Well, I'm changing it." I said, "But you taught me to do it this way a couple of years ago, and I only know how to do it this way. And so why are we changing it?" And she said, "Well, do you change your seminars?"
Mm.
She said,
She's wonderful.
"Well, do you improve how you speak to people?" And I realized in that moment that she's absolutely right, that when we're
Mm.
disciplined, we're constantly trying to be better. We're constantly trying to transmit something different through our legacy to our children.
Mm.
We're constantly trying to make sure that our kids see that how we treat their mom is better today than how we treated their mom when they were little.
Mm.
And they're seeing us consistently change because they we've given them an example that we will not be content, we will not be stagnant, we refuse to remain at the place we were yesterday.
Mm.
And so it's important. I think discipline for me is really, really important. Discipline in how I write, discipline in how I forgive, because some people can test that. Some people oftentimes want to pressure you for trust when they've operated in such a way where they've done things that are very unforgiving in your life. And we teach people this: trust is not forgiveness. We're taught to forgive, but that doesn't mean that we have to necessarily trust. It takes discipline to be able to forgive someone and to realize they're not really trustworthy. Don't bend your trust because you forgave them. And that's a discipline thing. I've got people in my family now that are pressuring me for trust with forgiveness. And I just refuse to do it because
Mm.
trust takes time.
Fascinating, Ed. Your synonyms that I wrote down for discipline is love, innovation, and trust.
Mm, mm.
Is there a certain amount of discipline that needs to be adhered to, enforced when you're killing giants?
I think so. Because you can think you've destroyed a giant of anger in your life one day
Mm.
and go through something and see that giant of anger rear its head up again a year later or a week later. And so I think it's important that we remember the things that we're doing to confront the giants that have tried to grow into our generation. My mom was very independent. She didn't trust people. Her motto was, if you want to get something done, do it yourself. And no matter how much I said I would never be like that with my mom, when
Hmm.
conflict came, I found myself doing just that.
Mm.
And so we underestimate how our family history impacts everything that we do in life. How we could be reacting or responding to our wives, our spouses, but reacting to something else or to someone else in our past.
Mm.
And so I shared this earlier before. It's tough to give people what we didn't receive. 2 Corinthians 1:3 says that Paul wrote, God is the God of endless comfort. And if we never received comfort from our parents or caregivers or people, he still comes alongside of us to help us comfort people with the comfort we received from him. So watch this. Even if I never got it from a parent, my mom or my father, I could comfort them, my family, with the comfort that God has given me in the
Mm.
darkest seasons of my life. And so I think, yeah, it's important that we use discipline to face the different giants that are in our life, whether they're giants of fear or dissatisfaction or addiction or procrastination or bad family history. It's important that we exercise discipline to continue to rewrite the narrative and history that was started in our family line.
What an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, Ed. I was so excited when we set this up. And anybody who's listening, how can they get in touch with you? How can they get your book? How they get in touch with you?
We're on social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram. I think LinkedIn is under Ed Norwood or Champions Unleash, Champions underscore Unleash, Ed Norwood under LinkedIn. Um, they can go to my website, ednorwood.com, and get to the book. They'll see some links to Amazon and Barnes and Noble. The book is also in Target and Walmart. But if they Google Amazon Be a Giant Killer, they'll see it. And we just encourage people as they read it, share with us how it impacted you to share your story,
Mm.
because our work is unfinished until we pull that story out of you.
Ed Norwood, NORWOOD. .com. I'll make sure we put it in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much for your time and your inspiration. It helps me, and I know it'll help others. And it's you have a wonderful light, and I appreciate you taking the time with me today. I appreciate you writing the book and not just keeping this that can help so many to yourself, but sharing it with everybody so they can hear your story and hopefully learn from it and pass on better legacy and better generations. Ed, thank you so much for your time today. I hope one day if I'm on the West Coast, we get together and have a cup of tea, perhaps with your
I
wife
love
as
that.
well.
You got to come out. We're in Costa Mesa near the Santa Ana airport. I'd love to do that. Let me know. Thank you.
Fantastic, Ed. You be well.
Thank you. You will. You as well.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations.